this was about as bizarre and as easy as it gets.
So the number for me was a number that would allow me to never have to work again.
I feel like we got top.
I went from a sale of $500,000 to in debt.
$192 million.
This is Built to Sell Radio with your host, John Warlow.
So what's your biggest question when it comes to selling your company? You know, when I ask that question of other entrepreneurs, I hear things like, how do I avoid an earnout? When's the best time to sell? How do I create a bidding war? These questions, along with many others, inspired me to write the book, The Art of Selling Your Business. It's a field guide for punching above your weight when it comes to selling your business. I've taken all the best practices from the 300 plus interviews I've done for this show and distilled them down into an action plan for you. You can get it along with some gifts from my listeners when you go to builttosell.com/selling. Welcome to another edition of Built to Sell Radio. My name is John Warlow, and my job here today is to help you punch above your weight when it comes to negotiating the sale of your company, which is something that my next guest, Rafael Zimberoff, did with great skill. He built a company called ShipRush, up to around 12 employees, when he sold it for $14 million in cash plus a $3 million earnout. Not bad for a business with a dozen people. Lots to learn from Rafael in this episode. Here, what I loved about this conversation was how he thought about gaining negotiating leverage by removing his dependency on one of his key business partners, Stamps.com. And I'll get him to describe that in detail. You should take away from this conversation that if you can get yourself into the payment stream, in other words, making your customer believe that you are their provider and not just a kind of somewhere along the supply chain, you're going to increase your leverage in a negotiation to sell your business. Again, Rafael would describe that in much more clarity than I just did. He'll talk a little bit about how he convinced customers and even potential acquirers that they would be better off buying his product or company as opposed to trying to compete with them or building it themselves, which is probably something you've considered as well. He'll talk about how to pick an M&A provider, and I think share some great wisdom on that front. Lots to take away from this episode. Here's to tell you the entire story is Rafael Zimberoff. Rafael Zimberoff, welcome to Built to Sell Radio.
Thanks for having me here, John.
ShipRush. Can you describe this company in layman's terms?
ShipRush. Well, ShipRush is both the name of the company and the name of the product the company made, which was an online parcel shipping application. So if you send out parcels, which typically means you're either in e-commerce, wholesale, or retail distribution, have your own website, or you sell on a marketplace like eBay or Amazon are considered marketplaces if you put your merchandise up there for sale, you need to generate parcel shipping labels for all these orders coming in. And ShipRush is a tool that lets you connect directly to all of these things, to the Amazon and eBay marketplaces, to a Shopify web store or Magento or other web store you may have set up, pull all your orders into one place, generate shipping labels and packing lists for all of those things to automate what we call the back end of the e-commerce process. And remember, there are many businesses that are hybrid. You may have a brick and mortar store or a retail location of some kind. It could be a Pilates studio, it could be anything. And you may do some portion of business online where you're actually shipping out product. So, the range of businesses that consume a product like ShipRush is really broad. Everything from a crafter on Etsy to somebody who has 20,000 SKUs selling spare parts for power tools.
Sure,
right?
massive.
Yeah, a big range. It might just be a one-person operation out of an apartment in Manhattan, or it could be a whole facility in a commercial zone.
So how did you guys make money? Like, what was the business model?
Well, in tech, there are two or three dominant business models when you're selling a software product that's on a website, right? We call these SaaS applications, right? Software as a service.
Sure.
We all use them, whether we're using something like Slack or QuickBooks Online or FreshBooks or any of the tools we use.
Yeah, our listeners would be used to those sorts of platforms because they're running businesses. So yeah, QuickBooks, HubSpot, Slack, all that stuff. They're all
right.
Yeah. So SaaS, I'm familiar with $99 a month, and you get access to the software or whatever.
There you
Is
go.
that the model you guys used? Or?
That was absolutely our retail model, but the ShipRush business was actually pretty sophisticated because it's a different kind of software. When you use something like a QuickBooks or a FreshBooks or any of these other tools we're mentioning, you are really just buying access to use that website, to use that app on the web. Mm-hmm. Because when ShipRush, you print a shipping label, that shipping label actually costs money. It costs $5, $10, $20. If you are doing freight with ShipRush, which ShipRush also did, if you were shipping your goods out on pallets, either you were selling wholesale to retailers, you were selling barbecues, big old barbecues went on a pallet. That shipment could be a few $100s. So
when you say the label you mean the physical label, because it is a direction to a shipping company and prepayment to a shipping company to move box from A to B, the actual piece of paper has value.
Yeah, it's like a postage stamp.
Yeah.
It's like a big old postage stamp that instead of being worth 50 cents is worth many dollars. So yeah, all these labels, whether it's a FedEx label or a UPS label or a priority mail label,
yeah, I get it.
Or a bill of lading that for a pallet or 5 pallets that are going to go on a truck, that is a business transaction. And ShipRush obviously doesn't have the truck that's going to come and pick up your package. It's FedEx or UPS or what have you that's actually going to do it. So because the ShipRush technology product was at the center of this larger business transaction, there are other revenue streams available to a product like ShipRush beyond the $50 or $99 a month subscription fee that everybody can see when you go to shiprush.com. Oh, I can get it. This plan is $39 a month. That plan is $79.
Okay. So how did you guys make money? I'm still curious.
Well, one of the things ShipRush did differently in our space. So our space has a handful of companies that make web applications similar to ShipRush. ShipStation is very popular. Shipping Easy, ShipWorks, ShipRush. There are a couple of others that are smaller. And something that ShipRush did differently than other players in our space is we took the technology we created and we licensed pieces of it to much larger companies. So an example of this is the QuickBooks accounting software has a UPS, a FedEx shipping built into it, and it has had that already since 2004 or 2005. And that was done using technology licensed from ShipRush. We also licensed technology to FedEx, to eBay, to Pitney Bowes, to Stamps.com. So we knew that we could take our product to market, but we also knew that we could help solve problems for much larger companies. In the tech space, and not every business has this, but you can find things like this in the construction industry, for example, where you come up with a workflow or a tool or an approach that you can take advantage of and that you can sell yourself, but that there are other larger organizations that can even take bigger advantage of it.
Yeah.
And tech is particularly good for those kinds of licensing arrangements.
It makes a ton of sense. So in the case of like a QuickBooks, I'm hearing brands like FedEx and others, these companies have like virtually unlimited resources. I mean, their stocks are through the roof, in particular, any SaaS app like QuickBooks. I mean, why don't they just do it themselves? Like, why do they need a little company in Seattle? No disrespect whatsoever in saying that, but really, if you're QuickBooks and you wanted to integrate a shipping app, why on earth would you license somebody else's stuff when you could just send 3 guys into a back room for a year with lots of coffee and make it themselves? Help me understand that.
It's a very, very good question. It's something everybody asks. There's always the buy it or build it kind of math that happens, particularly in tech, more so in tech than in a lot of other segments. And I can illustrate this with a simple story.
Sure.
So Intuit, when they had the idea of doing parcel shipping, they talked to some people at FedEx, and FedEx said they should consider collaborating with ShipRush, which they did. When we completed that, and that went live, we were not under any kind of exclusivity. So I went and approached Peachtree accounting software, which used to be the main competitor to QuickBooks. And I knew the folks over at Sage, which was the parent company that owned Peachtree at the time. And I said, look, folks, like, you can do this yourself, or you can license it from us. And here was the pitch I gave them. I said, why don't you scope out doing it yourself? And whatever it comes out to costing you, just offer us half. We will say yes, and everyone wins. So that was the pitch I gave them. So they went off and took a few months. And the story I'm telling right now is very common in tech. Parts of it, all the different parts of it. They went off and scoped out the project, right? Figured out where they're going to need 3 guys, like you proposed, or 6 or 5 months or 10 months. They scoped the whole thing out. They called me back and they said, look, good news. We've scoped it out. We know how long it's going to take. We know what it's going to cost. But the bad news is we don't have a dime to pay ShipRush for this tech. We've got budget for our staff engineers to do it, and we've got calendar time for our staff engineers to do it, but we don't have any money to write a check to an external company. So even though you would take half the money this is actually going to cost us, we aren't in a position to do that. You got to love big companies, right?
Oh God, you're making I'm just like getting like squeamish just remembering. I used to run this big this company that worked with big technology companies and research companies, and we helped them with their understand the SMB market and so forth. And all this kind of nonsense about like, I don't have the budget, but if I steal it from this budget and characterize it as this, I can. It's just like, oh my God, how do you guys make any money ever?
It's amazing companies function, right? Like really when we would think about this, like how does business even survive with all these constraints and handcuffs, right?
Okay, back to Sage. They're like, we've got money, but not the right.
Right, but not in the right, not coded the right way to be able to have this conversation with ShipRush. So they went off and did it themselves. It took them 2 or 3 times as they expected, right? So it blew their budget by 100 or 200%. They finally got it built. They got it in the product. But now you had a huge delta already, which is that people who built it were perfectly competent software engineers, but they had never built shipping software before. Whereas the stuff we built was built by people who only did shipping software and had been doing it for years and knew everything there was to know about shipping software. So their solution was missing certain key things they didn't think about that shippers knew were key, so nobody used it. So they spent not just double what they would have spent on us. They spent 4 or 6 times more in dollars. They spent 4 or 6 times more in months and calendar time, because we would have delivered to them on in weeks. Instead, it took them a year or whatever.
And then came back to you
but then by then they'd already made all the effort they were going to make, and no one was using it. So how could they possibly justify further investment? Right? Like this is what happens in tech. That in tech,
and did they buy? In that example, did they buy from you?
No, never.
And
they ended up killing the feature in their product a few years later and putting those customers on our external shrink wrap product because they had a very small number of users that they could not justify maintaining the feature. And this is one of the things about shipping software that's also different. It's about software in general. It's one of the things that makes software different than construction, is that in tech, the amount that one invests when you're a business owner in maintaining the tech exceeds the amount you spent to build the tech.
Yeah.
So
I've seen that a few times over.
Yeah, and that's a difference where it's not really a capital expense, that it requires ongoing care and feeding. And everybody who's built a website learns this. Yeah, you stand up the website and you make this big effort and expense to stand it up and get all the pieces of it built. And then you discover you can't just walk away from it. It needs this ongoing investment and maintenance forever, basically. And that's the nature of tech. So anyway, like that's how that path went. And so to back up to your original question, why would a FedEx, why would an Intuit license from us? It's because they recognized that we could deliver on a predictable a predictable dollar number on a predictable calendar, and they would be paying us an ongoing amount of money. It wasn't a one-time investment. It was ongoing because we were going to need to give them updates, multiple times a year forever, and maintain all the latest and greatest stuff that UPS and FedEx add to their service. They add adult signature, they add this option, they add that option, right? So that was an ongoing relationship. So it turns it into a turnkey. And that's what we were offering these corporate entities. We were taking all the risk away, the schedule risk, the cost risk that the Peachtree guys encountered firsthand. Everyone in tech has experienced that. Everyone building an extra room on their house has experienced it.
Sure.
Right.
So what would one of these big tech companies pay to license ShipRush from you, like on an annual basis, ballpark?
We charged a lot. It was hundreds of thousands a year.
Hundreds of thousands a year.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
And was that multi-year contracts or 1 year renewal? Or how did you structure your contracts?
Typically, it's multi-year up front, and then it may go year to year downstream.
When you say multi-year up front, do they pay for multiple years?
They would commit to 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years up front. And then the deals often went year to year after the initial period.
Got it. And so what kind of churn rate did you have? I'm imagining it was pretty sticky. Like once people sign up,
very sticky.
Would you have lost customers very frequently or?
Well, on these big licensing deals, we lost close to zero. One of the keys in structuring these deals, it's not even the size of the deal in dollars that's important as it's the long-term success of the deal. Right? It doesn't do us any good. And this is one, actually, I'm going to come to a question underneath the question you just asked.
Sure.
Many times when people would want our technology, they would want to do a revenue share with us or a pay per user. Now, the problem with an architecture, a business architecture of that kind for us is that we don't have access to their users, only they do. So what if they fail to market it? What if they fail to promote it? Why should that roll back to us? So the keys to success, the only thing we could do to make it succeed was to make sure that ShipRush worked and did all the things it was supposed to do and was a valuable tool for their users. Actually getting it in their users' hands was not in our control. So a good example of this is the UPS and FedEx shipping that's been in QuickBooks for a long time. If QuickBooks fails to promote that feature, saying, hey, this is in here, right? This is in here. You can print a UPS label right from inside our app. If they fail to tell anybody, they won't have enough users and the project won't look like a success, but not because of anything we did or didn't do. Our part could be done perfectly, right? So this is where I come back to however you architect the business terms needs to lean toward success and allocate the risk appropriately.
Sure. So in your case, you didn't do rev share. You did these multi-year licensing deals. To me, that sounds like you're not carrying any of the risk. The QuickBooks or the enterprise company is 100% taking the risk.
We're also not getting the big gain. Right? We're not getting the big gain. If this thing makes zillions of dollars at 15,000 users, we aren't going to see that. We aren't going to get any benefit from that. But our downside risk is completely managed. We are getting paid reasonably for what we're delivering, and we're getting paid enough that we can continue to invest in the thing we're giving them. If you price it too low, you find yourself a year or two in saying, oh, we can't put any more time on this. It's not worth it.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned investment because I was going to ask you, how did you finance the growth of ShipRush? Did you raise outside money or?
Good question. We never raised outside money. We started in the 90s as a networking consulting house. Mm-hmm. Back in the 90s, that was a big thing. And so we were a networking consulting house. Originally, it was just me and then brought on a couple of people. We started reselling a product called Goldmine, which was a customer relationship. Okay. So we were one of the big Goldmine houses, and we started in writing software by writing add-ons to Goldmine.
No, interesting.
And that was our transition, our pivot to become from a consulting house into a software house, was writing Goldmine add-ons. And so we were completely bootstrapped. We never went to VCs. We never went to angels. We just took everything that we made and kept reinvesting it. And
who's the we? I understand there was another Zimberoff. Is that your spouse?
Yes, that was Anya. Anya was never involved in the business actively, but,
Okay.
But the LLC was owned by both of us. And the business was really me and whoever my chief engineer was at the time, which was my brother-in-law for the first few years, and then was an engineer we brought on in the late 90s. And the approach always was to take out as little as possible and keep investing in the product, because that was the only road to something ultimately useful. It's easy to cut expenses and milk the business, but the business isn't going to be very happy if you do that.
How did that impact your relationship with Anya? Because you were at this business from 93, when it was Z Firm, as I understand, 92, all the way up to like 18 months ago. Yep. It's a long time not to pull out money out of the company. And I know a lot of spouses who are like, this was a nice little project for you, but I'd like you to get paid properly now, because there's things we want to do in our personal life, like buy a house, buy whatever. And it creates all sorts of tension if one spouse is like putting all the money back into the company and the other is like sitting there saying, when is this company going to start paying off? How did you guys handle that conversation?
That's a good question. There really wasn't any money until the last handful of years. And, so certain things we did do, like we did buy a house early on. We did a bunch of things. Anya went to grad school and was in grad school for several years, getting a doctorate in the earlier years of the business. So that wasn't, we were in food, we were in a house, we were meeting our needs. And there wasn't any serious money to tap into until the last handful of years when, so we were able to pay off the house, before the sale, years before the sale of the business. We were able to pay off the house. We were able to pay off our Anya's student loans, things like that we were able to do. So that actually, while I owned the business, that was really not a material issue that I can recall.
How big did you get ShipRush in terms of revenue, or some proxy for size before you decided to sell? We
were 12 to 18 people, depending on how you count the contractors. For more than a dozen FTEs that were real FTEs, 12 or 13, and then another handful of contractors. So, 15 to 20 total headcount at the time of the sale.
And are you able to share revenue?
No, I don't believe I am.
Okay, that's okay. Yeah, that's.
And in tech, remember, there's one of the issues is that in certain segments, and this is not restricted to tech, but you find it more frequently in tech, where there are different valuation paradigms. So there's a classic valuation paradigm of some multiple of EBITDA, which is, a classic normal CPA's approach to a business valuation. In tech, if an arrangement can be seen as a strategic kind of deal, then EBITDA falls aside and it becomes a multiple of gross, or a multiple of nothing. So, it's just a number. And so this is, one of the keys in any space. I mean, this can happen even if you invent some new power tool. It doesn't have to be software. If it's perceived by the acquiring company as strategic, and especially if there are multiple possible acquiring parties, then things like, what was your profit, what was your EBITDA, blah, 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 become less relevant.
Yeah, I want to get into that now, because again, as we talked about, you have been in business for yourself since 92, Z Firm, and then ShipRush. What changed? You mentioned, it was profitable towards the end. There was money on hand. Like, was there some trigger that made you want to sell ShipRush?
Was there some trigger? Big swift kick in the behind. You got a minute for this? Because this is going to take a minute. So our business space, and this is kind of not every situation works like this. When we got into doing parcel shipping software, that was in the late 90s. There was no such thing as e-commerce, right? And we originally built our parcel shipping software for things like Goldmine and Act and Outlook, places where you had lists of addresses that you'd want to ship to. And then it was only in 2005-06 that we started building it for eBay and e-commerce and moved in that direction. And then in 2009, so the kick, and then I'll explain what led up to the kick, why the kick was such a kick. The kick was in 2014, Stamps.com acquired our number one competitor, which is a company called ShipStation. And this was really shocking to us because we had a very large business relationship with Stamps.com. They were buying a ton of our technology. Starting in 2009, Stamps.com did their first licensing arrangement with us in 2009 to connect their own shipping app to e-commerce systems like eBay and Amazon, Shopify, WooCommerce, and what have you. And then in 2011, they bought more ShipRush from us on these multi-year licensing deals. And then in 2014, out of the blue to us, they announced this large acquisition of our number one competitor.
How much of your revenue on a percentage basis would you have been getting from Stamps.com at that time?
At that point, it was double digits, between 12 and 24%.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a big chunk of our revenue, and it was a.
And what happened? Did they just call you up one day and say, "We're giving you notice that all the contracts"?
No, they didn't terminate the contract. They bought ShipStation, but did not do anything in their relationship with us that day or that month or even that year. But 6 months after they bought ShipStation, they bought our other primary competitor, which is a company called ShipWorks. And so, our first realization was, we're not at the top of their list for an acquisition? How'd that happen? And then to discover we're not even number two after selling them millions of dollars of tech and servicing thousands of shippers together. That was a really, really big kick for us that the space was changing. That's the key thing, is that one of the things about business, I have a friend who says his business philosophy is, he says, you just need to build up cash reserves larger than you ever think are reasonable to survive all the downturns. And the whole point of business is just to stay in the game long enough for it to become interesting. And if you stay in long enough, and he's thinking 5, 10, 15, 20 years, like he's not measuring in months, right?
Yeah.
If you stay in long enough, you'll sooner or later find a cycle where you're making money. And so the opposite of that, now his business is commercial real estate, which has these big cycles, right? And he went through, the dot-com crash and the 2008 crash.
Mm-hmm.
So in tech, what happened is that we happened to be in a space which was e-commerce facing. And the whole e-commerce landscape goes through these big shifts every 3 to 6 years. And this was a shift that all of a sudden companies like ShipRush were hot commodities to certain kinds of acquiring entities.
Got it. So your first reaction, so I don't want to put words in your mouth. What was your first reaction when you learned Stamps.com had made the first acquisition in ShipStation? Like, what was your first, what did you say to Anya that night?
At that point, we thought, and that first acquisition is like, okay, we thought we were at the top of the list, but we know but we were wrong. We're just near the top of the list. So it's okay.
Okay. So I want to explore that. So you thought you were at the top of the list. This is going to resonate with some listeners because I think a lot of people think, oh, well, when ABC company wants to make an acquisition, of course they're going to come to us. Right. So when you say you were at the top of the list, had you had any conversations regarding acquisition with Stamps.com in the past? Had they sort of raised the specter of the possibility before?
Nothing serious, but here was, I believe, my mistaken perspective is that I was looking at it from my chair, which is that I was a technologist and I was selling them technology that was successful. They were not backing out of deals with us because we were failing to deliver. They were staying in the deals with us because we were delivering. And I thought that meant that we had proven ourselves and that we would be at the top of the list. And what I failed at was that was actually not their framework for acquisitions. They were not the kind of company to acquire partner organizations that were providing critical technology to them. They were the kind of company that was looking for business revenue growth curves. And I didn't understand that ShipStation had a much more aggressive growth curve than we did, and were much more marketing and revenue focused than we were. And that was more interesting to Stamps.com, and I failed to recognize that. So,
got it.
So that's part A. Part B was that ShipRush was a relatively complex business. We were selling a product on the street that you can see at ShipRush.com today, which looked more or less comparable to what ShipStation was selling on the street. But so much of our business was doing these white label technology deals with the FedExes of the world that our business was actually very nuanced and not something that you could look at in half a page. You could not summarize our business on half a piece of paper.
And that makes sense to me. I want to go back to the rationale, the strategic. You thought they would be interested because you delivered great technology.
Yep.
What you came to learn was that Stamps.com wanted new S curves, new revenue, new exciting revenue sources.
Right.
What happened to make you realize that? Like, how did you become aware that Stamps.com wanted different things in their acquisitions?
Just thinking about the acquisition of ShipStation and trying to come to a rationalization for it, trying to get out of my shoes and my perspective and think about it from their perspective. And then when they acquired ShipWorks, realizing that, they're building a portfolio, so that it's like General Motors. Like, we don't care if you buy a Buick or a Chevy or an Oldsmobile, or a GMC, like it's a Cadillac. You're coming to us either way. Right. So,
how'd that work out for them?
For Stamps or for GM?
No, for GM. It's not working out very well.
Yeah, Oldsmobile and Buick are gone. Here I'm saying, I'm realizing while I say that, I'm mentioning things that are ancient history at this point. So, but it worked out for General Motors for decades. I mean, let's be clear. All of these approaches work for, have their cycles. No, business is a story of cycles. So, so they were building this portfolio, and they were buying the number one company of each portfolio flavor, whereas ShipRush was kind of the number two in 3 different flavors. So, we were the only company that was doing these licensing deals, that was selling our technology to others. Nobody was doing that, but that's a very nuanced place to be, and was not something they needed.
Got it. And was your assumption that let me not give the answer to the question. What were you assuming your exit to be at this time back in 2014? Was it your assumption that you would eventually be acquired by somebody?
I always used the approach of increasing success by lowering expectations. So I really was not thinking in terms of an exit, especially once the business became reasonably profitable. It's like, another several years of this, and I'm happy. I'll have made enough out of the business and I've succeeded. So I was never, and one of the things that helped me have that perspective is that we were bootstrapped. We'd been in the game for a long time. We didn't have investors who were looking for an exit, which, that's obviously going to change somebody's perspective a lot who's running a business. So until 2014, an acquisition was not at the top of my list. Once 2014 came to a close, it's like, oh, if we don't sell, we're going to be up against this marketing machine, because stamps.com is an excellent marketing organization. That's always been their claim to fame in the parcel shipping ecosystem. So if we don't sell, we're going to be up against this marketing monolith that will be very challenging. Now, the flip side to that is, oh, well, that's fine. We'll just be selling our tech to everyone else who needs to compete with them. So there's still a place for us in the world, we think.
Who else was out there? I mean, I think of Stamps as being the giant gorilla. Was there anyone, like, who was the biggest competitor to Stamps at the time?
Once they started rolling up, so the competitor to Stamps until 2014, until these acquisitions, the competitor to Stamps was Stamps.com is based in Los Angeles, Southern California. And the competitor to Stamps.com was in Northern California in Silicon Valley called Indicia. And part of the ShipRush business for a number of years had been playing these two players off of each other, because they each offered, they were unique. They were the only two companies that were licensed with the Postal Service to provide technology to print postal shipping labels, because we were talking before about how that's a postage stamp, that's money.
Sure.
So it's very, very regulated to print these labels. And these were the only two companies that were licensed by the Postal Service to provide technology to tech companies like ShipRush and ShipStation and everyone else to print these labels. And we'd made a whole business playing these two firms off of each other, saying, oh, we'll move our users onto your tech with these business terms, or we'll move them onto your tech for these better business terms. And every couple of years, we would move our users around. And then in 2015, a really big thing happened, which is Stamps.com acquired their competitor, Indicia.
Mm-hmm.
And that was when we knew we would either sell or be gone in a couple of years. I went through a period of about a year where I understood, because they knew who all our customers were. Indicia and Stamps knew 2/3 of our customers, and we saw them go after smaller players and take those customers and put them on ShipStation. And so we knew at that point that we were in a truly existential crisis.
Did you create any bad blood with either Indicia executives or Stamps.com executives by kind of playing them off each other over
doing
the years,
what we did?
as you described? My point is, like, once Stamps had acquired Indicia, I'm wondering if you're playing one of them off each other over the years
came back to
created some bad blood. So they're like, okay, we're going to put these guys out of business because we're sick and tired of being, our rates being jacked up, et cetera. Did you get any of that blowback, or?
It was very complicated. We did not get the direct kind of thing that seems obvious here. It's like, oh yeah, now we've got them where we want them, et cetera, et cetera. ShipRush was too big a player to really mess with in a bad way, because the acquisition of Indicia was a huge ripple. It was a huge tidal wave, one of these waves going across the ecosystem that the people in the ecosystem felt strongly, but people outside it wouldn't have understood, wouldn't have impacted them directly, because everything kept working. So it was the major, in that 5-year period, that was the single major event to occur in this parcel shipping technology space. And it went through antitrust review. Like I was going to say,
weren't the people in Washington?
Yes, they were. There was a whole antitrust review. The whole acquisition was put on hold for a number of months. I was actually contacted by the folks at the Department of Justice or Department of Commerce. I'm trying to
Commerce, probably. Who knows?
Who were doing this. I was part of a couple of conference calls where they came, these attorneys at one of the agencies in Washington had a whole list of questions of the things they were concerned about. And, as we know, as we've all talked about in all these different contexts, their concerns were not my concerns, right? Or my concern was having multiple companies offering this tech. That was just not their concern. Their concern was how much Sally was going to pay to buy a pair of shoes online.
Okay, so Sorry, a lot of our listeners won't really want to know the plumbing of the shipping things, which is cool, but they will definitely identify with the sense that an 800-pound gorilla, if they turn their sights on them, has the potential to put them out of business, which is triggering their decision to sell, or at least the decision to get on their front foot and start thinking. So it did in your case. These two guys merge, and you're in a vulnerable spot. I think you used the words, if we don't sell, we're in a business within 2 years.
Yeah.
So what next? What, did you hire an M&A firm? What was your next step at that point?
Our next step was to hire an M&A firm, and the process is almost more important than the action. So I'd never done this before. So I called an old friend of mine who was an M&A attorney and said, hey, hey friend, I need an investment banker. And he said, oh, talk to firm such and such in downtown Seattle, which I did. We hired them, just to give some context for how this kind of thing goes. They say, oh, well, we charge an upfront fee. We only take serious people who are serious about selling. And their upfront fee at that time was $10,000 one-time check to get them on your side, paid the fee. They asked for a list of companies from me that I thought were likely acquisition folks. I gave them a list. They worked that list, which was maybe half a dozen companies. We had, as part of that, we had 2, maybe 3 management presentations, right? Like the way it works is the investment banker shops you around. The interested parties say, okay, we want, an hour or 2 on a Zoom call. Even then it was on Zoom. One of them was in person. And you go through a whole presentation with them, answer their questions. And that firm did get us a lowball offer from one of our existing licensees. So we got one offer in that process. It was really low. It was from one of the companies on the list I'd given them. It's like, I didn't need you guys to call them. I could have called them. And the way you
say lowball offer, why do you say lowball? Like, what multiple of revenue was their offer?
The offer was for, maybe 1 to 2 times our gross revenue at the time. But the reason it was lowball is that Stamps.com had created a market, right? They had done multiple acquisitions and kind of established what a multiple could be.
And what were those multiples that Stamps? What was Stamps paying for
their multiples? Were in kind of the, I don't know this hard, but it was kind of in the 6 or 7 to 11 times gross revenue.
Times revenue, right? Yeah, so big numbers compared to 1 to 2.
Yeah.
Okay, so the M&A firm goes out, gets a customer to give you a lowball offer, and you're like, not what I was looking for. Please. What's the next step?
Well, at that point, what happened is that the senior partner at the M&A firm was almost literally pounding the table, telling me, take the deal. And here's one of the key things, right? Like, you pay an M&A firm a success fee, typically 5% of the deal. It's going to be 3 to 6, but 4 or 5 is normal. And here they had gotten us a lowball offer from a company that I had brought to them that I easily could have called myself. And they're not comparing it to the other deals like I am. They're just saying, take the deal. I said no. And we ended up firing them and going back to the drawing board to become independent of the stamps and indicia technology, because that dependence was bad optically. It was bad for the future of the business. It was just bad at every level. And the offer was low enough that we just didn't feel there was downside risk in staying independent for another couple of years and seeing what we could do with the situation.
So help me understand that. So in what way were you dependent on the stamps and indicia kind of platform? I guess their labels were what?
They were the only ones who could give us the tech to print a priority label
So you had
label. And in e-commerce, remember, in B2C e-commerce, right? Business to consumer e-commerce, 60 to 80% of the shipping volume was going on the Postal Service.
And so you were dependent on because they had the license with the U.S. Postal Service.
Right.
You didn't.
Right.
So what, did you apply for a license yourself with the U.S. Postal Service?
We did a couple of magical things. One of them is that two companies had early stage technology to compete with the stamps and indicia technology, and that those things surfaced at just the right moment. And they were an early pre-beta whatever, but because we were well connected in the space, they approached us, said, hey, by the way, we have this. It's like, you do? We are definitely interested. And so that happened. And the other thing that happened is we changed our business model. In the past, when our software used indicia or used stamps, the customer opened an account with indicia or stamps and paid those companies, and we were not in the payment chain. We were not in the revenue stream. There was a revenue stream to us where the customer paid us $50 a month for our software. And then the customer was actually buying the labels directly from indicia or stamps. We changed the model. So they bought the labels from us and we bought them from the back end technology. So we were in the payment chain so that we could be truly independent of this tech because we'd been so burned. And the reason this is momentous is two things. A, as a business, we had very consciously avoided being in the payment chain for 15 years. We're like, we don't want those headaches. We don't want customers calling us, telling us their account is $4 off. Like, we just don't want that. And we don't have the business office to handle all that cash flow. So we changed. We said, no, we're getting into it. We understand it's complicated. We understand it's messy. We're all of a sudden going to be in the payment chain of millions of dollars a month of parcel shipping flow. Like, this is a serious commitment to build the infrastructure and to take on this role. It's two serious hats. It's a tech hat and it's just a role hat, a business responsibility hat. So we were going to do it, and we spent a year and we did it. And then we shopped the business again and we hired a new banker.
This is such an important point. I want to make sure everybody listening is capturing this idea. If you are in the chain, but you don't control the chain, ultimately you don't own the direct relationship with the consumer.
Yes.
You are in a much more vulnerable position. Whereas if you are
in the payment chain.
If you're in the payment chain, in particular, the customer thinks of you as the provider, that puts you in a power position when it comes to an acquisition. And so you made that change to put yourself in, as you described, the payment chain. And what next? So you did a year, then you went and shopped the business again. Where did you take it then?
The key thing is that I took a few months to find the right banker. And I would say this is one of the biggest takeaways from my experience, is that the right banker makes all the difference. All the difference.
Right banker, you're referring to an M&A professional who helps you. Now, okay, so how did you find the right banker? Because a lot of people are listening to this saying, okay, well, how did you find him or her?
So I'll describe the process I used, and this is going to vary for each industry and what have you. Early on in my process, back in 2014, a friend of mine who worked at a much larger tech company and had been involved in a bunch of M&A stuff had referred me to, he said, oh, we have this M&A guy who's amazing. He's Australian and he's really known in this little niche that we're in. And he did deals for us like you wouldn't believe. So I started talking to this guy. This guy's a one-man show. That's one of the crazy things, at least in tech. And I don't know if this is true in other segments, but in tech, a lot of these M&A firms are little boutique organizations of 1, 2, 3, 4 people who exist purely on their reputation. It's quite remarkable. So this guy was very upfront from the beginning. He said, I'm not your banker. You can come to me with any questions, but I don't know your segment for ShipRush. I don't know ShipRush. I don't know that world. I don't do e-commerce. What he specialized in was technology for streaming media. That was his niche. And he was known worldwide for negotiating M&A deals and representing buyers and sellers in that niche.
So did he refer you to someone though, or what was?
Not quite. What happened was I also then went to my attorney, who had been my business attorney for many years. And this is also a very important thing in the picture, is to have a consistent legal person who knows your whole contractual landscape, because that attorney has been doing it for you for a long time. And my attorney, went to an M&A attorney, and I started hearing this one name, who I then checked with the guy from Australia, and everybody say, I've been referred to so-and-so. And everybody said, solid. And I was being referred to one name who turned out to be one of a team of 3 or 4, teeny little boutique firm, New York, San Francisco. I ended up not dealing with that guy so much, but with his partners in San Francisco, Irfan, Iqbal, and Alan Kogan. And they were amazing. They were also a lot more expensive. Like, this is, it's the classic get what you pay for, I guess. Just to help everyone understand like what this looks like. Like, I was dead serious about being acquired. I now had multiple people saying these guys were really solid and top notch. People who I knew were themselves top notch. And that's one of the things, right? It wasn't, when I went to my friend the first time around who did some M&A work, it's like, yeah, a third of his work was M&A work. He wasn't an M&A focused only attorney. A third of his work was M&A work, and he refers me off to a firm that just wants to get a deal done. They don't specialize in this industry. I didn't know to ask that. I didn't know what questions to ask. Like, you really want to know, tell me the deals you've done in my segment recently. Tell me
You mentioned the first firm charged you $10K up front. What did Irfan and Alan charge you up front as a work fee?
$25,000 per calendar quarter.
Per quarter. Was there any cap on how many quarters did they tell you?
I went into it saying, I want to spend 6 months on this. If we succeed, great. If we don't, I want to move on and refocus on my business.
And was that a non-refundable work fee?
Non-refundable. You were paying them $25K, so they answer the phone for 3 months.
And was that was that deducted from their success fee?
Their stock terms were no. I negotiated it to yes. I think going into it with a clear idea, look, these things take a lot of your energy as a business owner. So part of my thing was like, I will give this my attention for a number of months, but not for a year. That was, I didn't feel I had that to give it. I felt like if there was a possibility here, that 6 months was a reasonable amount of time. And we were actually, we were in lockup in 6 months, like from the time I signed with them to the time that we were actually had accepted an offer and were in diligence was right about 6 months.
Got it. And so let's work through what Irfan and Alan did. You signed with them, and what was the next step?
So these guys really have their act together. And that is something that I will say is like, really early if an outfit like this has their act together. What did they do in the first few weeks? They did a pre-diligence. Like, their first thing was they send you a whole huge long checklist of stuff they want to see, because they want to know how ready you are for diligence right from the beginning, not from 4 months in. And day one, they want to know that when they get to the home stretch, that you actually have your act together.
How did you handle the pre-diligence? Did you hire someone to do it for you, or did you do it yourself?
I did it all myself.
Wow.
I did it all myself, but I could, because the business was clean. Like, we had a lot of contracts, but I had them all in one place.
What was the most surprising thing on the pre-diligence list? The list, the thing that you're like, really? They want to know this?
Yeah, they want a copy of your HR manual, like...
You're like, what HR manual would that be?
No, we had one.
Did you?
I'm a third generation American small businessman, right? Like, both of my grandfathers ran businesses. My father's father had a whole series of businesses. My father ran one business for essentially his whole career. He had a couple smaller ones before that. So no, I always had an HR manual. I had an HR manual, and we had 4 employees. When there were 4 people in the office, I had an HR manual. What did I do? I called my dad. I said, Dad, I need an HR manual. He said, I'll send you mine, doctor it up. So I took it. Yeah, that's I changed. I made it appropriate for his business was a very different kind of business, so I had to change some stuff. And I had one. Yeah.
Okay, so they send you the pre-diligence. You feed them that information. Then what? Like, who came up with the list of potential acquirers?
The banker. So they asked me for my list, and they asked me for 2 lists, actually. They said, give us a list of companies that might be interested, and send us a list of companies we should not contact. Because in our space, I was very concerned. I was probably excessively concerned in retrospect. I was really concerned that if Stamps.com knew we were actively selling, that they would do something to make that impossible. So there were certain players, even FedEx, right? Like FedEx and UPS had experienced this whole suite of their partners being acquired by Stamps.com, of the biggest partners servicing the small medium business segment for shipping software. We're all getting rolled up. Like, that's kind of intimidating, even if you're UPS. So anyway, they asked me for 2 lists, but they then built a much longer list. And this is also one of the signs of a good banker, is that they were shopping us to all these companies I'd never heard of. I'd never heard of Descartes. Really, I hadn't. And most of the companies that they shopped us to, I had either not heard of or had not considered a candidate. And they shopped
ballpark, how many names on the big list?
30 to 40.
On their big list after they took yours and they did their own due.
I gave them a handful. I really gave them, right around 5. They went and did their work and came up with a list of something like 35 to 40. They built, the teaser sheet, like a 2-pager, 3-pager that they sent to those 30 or 40. And then the interested parties from that, we did the management presentation.
How many of those do you think you did?
About a dozen, 10, 12.
About a dozen.
Yeah.
And then how many offers did you get?
So the banker then runs a process. When you have a situation like this of multiple interested parties, the banker says, okay, we're going to be accepting offers, whatever it is, February 1st. And so then we had multiple offers. I don't know if I can go into exactly how many, but we had multiple offers, and we had multiple offers above the minimum threshold we were seeking. So
sorry, you said minimum threshold. You mean you had a number? I
had a target. A target.
What was your target in terms of multiple of revenue? Because you got an offer of 1 to 2.
Yeah, my target in dollars was 10 million.
Okay.
That if offers over 10, I was really interested in. And
ballpark, what kind of multiple of revenue? Because I'm just going back to originally.
I'm not sure I should go into that too much.
Okay.
I don't know exactly where my lines are. So I'm going to
no problem. So assuming I'm going to just sort of make some basic judgments and assume it was higher than 1 to 2.
Yeah.
You don't have to confirm or deny that, but that's all good. But for you, it was a number. Interestingly, what's magic about 10 in your mind? What was magic about 10 in your mind?
It would give me enough to give all the staff a good bonus, and it would give me enough to say, maybe this is the only business I'm going to run in my life.
Did you go through what financial advisors tell you, take 3% or 4% and like you can live off that for X number? Like, did you do any of that math, or was it
not
more?
A ton of it.
Not a ton. Okay.
No.
But you kind of had it and you knew enough that it would be enough if you
Yeah.
Got it. And so anything north of 10. So you mentioned you got multiple offers. Were there multiple offers above 10?
Yes.
Got it.
Yes, and this is where the banker does everything. Like, I've seen situations in my segment where the business owner tries to be the banker and tries to run the whole thing. And I knew a couple things. One, even though I was a very accomplished negotiator, because that was all these big licensing deals, I was doing it all. I knew that this was a deal I should not be negotiating. Too much of my identity was tied up in this. So I knew that was a big part of why I knew I had to have a banker. And the banker is running it all. When you have multiple interesting offers, the banker goes back to them and says, hey, we have multiple interesting offers. Would you like to revise your offer? And so they come back, and that runs for a couple of days. And
on a percentage basis, how much were they able to improve the offers on a percentage basis doing that?
Oh, gosh, pretty good. I would say probably went up another 10 or 20%.
Okay.
Yeah.
By sort of playing one off the other.
Yeah. By telling folks that, this was serious and that they had to do their best. They did really well. I mean, that's the thing. Like on the one hand, 5% success fee, that's a lot of dollars, and you're a small business owner.
$500,000 on 10.
It's a lot of dollars. On the other hand, like there is no question that these guys more than earned that. Everything they did, from all the companies they shopped us to the cleanliness of the process, to how seriously acquirers took us because we were represented and it wasn't me doing the calling. Right? Like that's a totally different thing. If I call 5 companies and say, hey, I'm looking to sell, versus, an established firm. These guys, their firm at the time was called Inertia Advisors. Now they're called Elantra. When somebody from Elantra or Inertia, who's an established person, this is all they do. This is the only thing they do. They've got a clean reputation. When they call the corp dev, right? Because at big companies, the people who do the acquisitions are corp dev. When they call corp dev listens. Like, this is an opportunity. This company is almost certainly going to be sold, right? The ShipRush in this case, the company being represented by Irfan and Alan. And so, like, if we actually want this, we better stop and pay attention.
That makes sense. And so who ultimately is at the stage of the game, if you can share? I know Descartes was there because they were the winning bidder ultimately. Who else was in the mix? Are you able to share the other names of the types of companies?
No. I mean, some of them were companies that we had business relationships with one kind or another. There's one interesting twist, which is one of these things that happens. There was one very big company that had told us from the beginning they wanted in on the process. They were interested in acquiring us. They wanted in on the process. They had actually been part of that first process in 2014, and I had to rent a room with the high-end video conferencing equipment to give them a whole presentation with the first banker. And they had like 8 people in the room on their side. We did this whole huge thing. And when I hired Irfan and Alan, they told Irfan and Alan from the start, we want in, we're interested. 2 weeks before. And so we did the whole management presentation with them and everything. And they're a very big, they're a Fortune 700 company, very big company, billions of dollars of revenue every year. 2 weeks before the process starts, when we're accepting bids, senior guy there gets me on the phone to say, Raf, want to let you know, we've got some internal organization to do and we're not going to be participating. It's like, okay. Nothing I can do about that, right? Like, okay, you're not going to be participating, your call. And Irfan and Alan do the whole process. We accept an offer. We're now in the exclusive diligence period for 90 days. We're about halfway through that. And diligence is going, but it's not going fast. The same big company calls me up, Raf, can you fly down to San Francisco for a meeting near the SFO airport? Sure. Fly down, and here's the same executive along with his chief henchman to say, we got our internal stuff all organized. We're interested.
Okay, but you've signed a no shop clause, presumably in the lockup. So aren't you kind of in breach of that clause to even meet with them?
I didn't know what it was about. Okay. So the answer is I had no idea what it was about when I flew down.
Yeah.
So I was okay meeting with them. So, but now this is a very, very delicate moment. Okay. This is a very delicate moment because if I say the wrong thing, I can blow everything up. Okay. So my answer to them was, thank you very much. I will let Alan and Irfan know. Right? Because I am not doing this deal. And this is a very key thing, right? Like, this guy was like, why wasn't he going through his corp dev to talk to Alan and Irfan to begin with? right? In retrospect, I don't think I've even thought this thought until this moment. I don't think I've thought this thought until this moment. Why am I hearing directly from a senior executive about a thing that their corp dev and my bankers have been talking about exclusively? I've never been in the conversation. I'm only really realizing that at this moment. And in a sense, he may have been trying to fish how the process was going. Perhaps. I obviously don't know. So, so I let Alan and her fund know, which actually has a very positive, a salutary effect, because they're
What does a salutary mean?
A good. It means a good effect. Okay. It has a good effect on diligence, which is they're able to go to Descartes that we're in exclusivity with and say, we've received an unsolicited, inquiry related to acquisition, because what you're obligated to do under the terms of this lockup period, the company that is for sale is acquired to let the acquiring entity know if any unsolicited offers come in.
That's going to light a fire into Descartes pretty quickly.
So all of a sudden, diligence went into high gear, right? Because once that 90-day lockup ends, we could potentially say we're not renewing it because we have this other interested party, right?
Yeah.
So diligence went into high gear. Descartes, as you can see, they do a lot of acquisitions. Before the pandemic, they would do kind of 2 to 4 a year. So they are a real machine. They have a process that is very structured.
For folks who don't know Descartes, what do they do in layman's terms, and what did they see in you guys?
Well, Descartes is a logistics technology company. So when you think of moving goods, physical goods, they have technology that covers many, many parts of moving things around the world and around the block and around the city. So they have technology that helps book containers on container ships to move from Asia to the US or wherever. They have technology to do customs clearing, to get all that container of goods through customs. They have technology to, if you have a fleet of trucks, deliver, say you are a chain of furniture stores and you have a warehouse or multiple warehouses and couple dozen furniture stores, they have the software that that will tell you what to put on every truck to deliver out to the stores or to deliver to the customers who bought.
So this was just another compliment to what they were already doing. I'm surprised they weren't on your first list in a way. I mean, the shipping space as well as you do.
Because they weren't that big in parcel. And US parcel at that time, they hadn't crossed my radar. They owned a company called Ozlink, which was adjacent to us. So I knew about Oz, but I didn't know about Descartes.
Interesting. And so this unsolicited bid from the Fortune 700 company kind of lit a fire into Descartes, and they accelerated due diligence. They went from kind of dragging their feet to, okay, let's get this thing done.
Yeah, it got more attention.
If only we could all manufacture an unsolicited bid during due diligence, our lives would be much better. But good for you for not negotiating, because that would have been in breach, and also it would isn't that interesting? Well, that's fantastic. And so the ultimate deal, as I've seen, because Descartes was generous and actually published the deal, so it looks like it was $14 million cash up front plus a $3 million earnout, or the potential for an extra $3 million. What was the earnout period like? Did you hit your bogey, or? Yeah,
we hit it. The way a lot of these deals in the tech sphere is they set a top line revenue number target, and this was a 2-year thing. So there was a target for year 1. There's a target for year 2. And if you hit it, you get it. And if you miss it, you don't. Some of these deals, my understanding is that in some of these deals, everybody kind of knows up front the company's not going to hit it. In our case, we had strong confidence we would. In fact, part of our confidence came from the fact that this big company who had pulled out of the process and then put themselves back in, I was actively negotiating a big tech licensing deal with them during this entire period. And the announcement by Descartes came 2 days after I inked the deal. So as part of diligence, we're showing them drafts of this contract that hasn't been signed yet, right? That's not normal. Normally they're seeing all the executed contracts, right? Which is every deal has that. But here we were actively negotiating a pretty big, for us, licensing deal. So we had to surface that. That was part of our revenue projection, was that we were going to land this deal. And so here we ink the deal, whatever it was. Let's say it was on a Monday. The acquisition was announced on a Wednesday or Thursday. It was just a few days later. So here I've already goosed our revenue the day that the acquisition is closed. The big company then, of course, calls me that day saying, "What the heck? We thought we were doing business."
Those terms, by the way.
Yeah, right.
I'm sure they said, "What the heck?
What the heck?" We thought we were doing business with this, small company in Seattle. Now all of a sudden it's this bigger logistics company. So they had to be calmed down, and there were no problems with that licensing deal. Everything was delivered A-okay.
So you knew you had this in the bag, this first year revenue bogey.
Right.
If this contract came through, you could hit the 1 year. What about the second year?
Well, that wasn't enough for the 1 year. We needed growth from other places too. That was just a piece of the growth we needed. We needed just to continue to execute and continue to grow the business. There's a lot of potential in the space. So we had a lot of confidence that we could continue to grow, even without marketing support, because we'd never had a lot of that on our own.
Was the earnout structured so that it was either 0 or 1, like you either hit it or you didn't, and year one you hit it or you didn't?
That. Yeah, you didn't get a percentage.
There wasn't.
There are percentage earnouts, but not in this one.
In your case, it was like either you hit it or you don't.
Correct.
And you move on.
Correct.
And it sounds like you hit it in both of the years, which is great. Did they try to keep you at Descartes after the second year and say, "Oh, would you manage this division for us?" Or was there any sort of negotiation to try to keep you on as an employee?
I kind of wish there had been.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Why?
I expected there would be, partly because one of the things that happens in these conversations, sometimes, not always, is that the acquiring company heaps praise on the company they're acquiring. And maybe that's just part of the dance, Sure. Now, at this point, I kind of say, oh, that must just be part of the dance. It is in a lot of the bigger companies that do acquisitions, the Microsofts and Amazons of the world, Facebooks of the world, they often structure the deals with longer term incentives for the leadership to stay, that goes in 4, 5, 6 years. Outside of that top tier, you don't find that as much. And a lot of it just has to do with what's the strategy of the acquiring company. Is the acquiring company trying to build a team, or does the acquiring company have some other agenda? But in your case, you said you kind of wish they had. Why? Would you have worked for Descartes? I liked the team I was working with. I was working with we had worked together at ShipRush for 18 years. The core team had been together for 18 years. And we really liked spending time together. And so, I had no problem going to work every day. I liked what I was doing and I liked who I was doing it with. I was not burned out. See, that my burnout stopped when I sold the business. Because when I sold the business, I didn't have to worry if the power was going to be on. Yeah. I didn't have to worry if the data center was going to have a problem. So my life got so much better the moment the transaction closed. So I wasn't burned out at that level, but the heart of the core team has all moved on at this point. Yeah. Yeah. Literally, I've done 300 of these interviews or more. And you're the first person I have ever interviewed, I think. Maybe, Jay Steinfeld from blinds.com, I think, stayed at Home Depot after. But I think literally everyone else has been ready to hit eject the day their earnout ends. So that is what I ultimately did. And that is what the acquiring company assumed I would do. Yeah. But it wasn't the path I thought I was on until the last couple months. But you do raise a very interesting point, which I've heard before, which is when the check clears and that money is in your bank account and it can't be taken away, you're kind of playing with house money a little bit in the fact that you can get back to sort of just enjoying your work and not worrying about these heavy things like such a huge percentage of your net worth tied to the outcome of this deal, blah, 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 blah. Right.
Well,
you're
I'm
also-
so
You
Go
get
ahead.
so much headspace back. Like that's
Yeah.
the thing. When you're a business owner, you're worried about everything. Is someone going to call in sick tomorrow morning? Is the power going to be on? Is this going to happen? Is that going to happen? You're managing 105 little things every moment of every day. And you're worrying about it at 10 at night, not just at 10 in the morning.
Mhm.
And then once the check clears, like you say, the main thing that happened to me was, all I have to worry about is the software, the product that I'm in charge of. That's it.
That
I
you
only
can't
have to worry
probably
about the
enjoy
product.
as a
I don't have,
technologist, yeah.
exactly. I don't have to worry about the other 105 things. So that did absolutely increase my pleasure in work a lot.
Hey, Descartes, if you're listening, Raphael is available. You can. No, I'm just
There you go.
kidding.
I talked to some of the guys over there. I'm in touch.
I'm just teasing. This is so great. I appreciate you sharing the story with us. I think there's a ton for people to learn. What are you doing now? Where can people reach out? Is there a website they can find you on, or what's the best way for folks to reach out as they're listening? And
The
wanna
way to
say hi?
find me is on my LinkedIn profile, Rafael
Okay.
Zimberoff with an F on LinkedIn. That is my presence, and that's where I do my business communication. I am
And we'll
doing
put that in the show notes as well.
cool, and I do help small business owners think about how their business is structured. Negotiation coaching is a strength of mine, and anything that has to do with technology and logistics is obviously my backyard.
That's awesome. So it's Raphael Zimberoff. And so if folks need to double check the spelling, builttosell.com, and you'll see the show notes there, and you can check in with Raphael on LinkedIn.
Yep.
And I'm grateful for you sharing the story. It's great. And I'm glad that it all worked out for so well.
Thank you, John. This has been an interesting conversation.
Hey, if you like today's episode, you're going to love my new book, The Art of Selling Your Business. The book was inspired by the cohort of my guests over the years who have been able to negotiate an exit far better than the benchmark in their industry, sometimes 2 or 3 times more than I would have expected. I was curious to understand the tactics and strategies of these entrepreneurs and what they do differently from average performers. The result is a playbook for punching above your weight when it comes to selling your business. To learn more, go to builttosell.com/selling, where we put together a collection of gifts for listeners who order the book. Just go to builttosell.com/selling. Built to Sell Radio is produced by Haley Parkhill. Our audio and video engineer is Dennis Labataglia. If you like what you've just heard, subscribe to get a new episode delivered to your inbox each week. Just go to builttosell.com.
Thanks for listening to Built to Sell Radio with John Warrillow. For complete show notes with links to additional resources, visit builttosell.com/blog. John is the founder of the Value Builder System. To find out how to improve the value of your business by 71%, visit valuebuildersystem.com. John is also the author of Built to Sell, Creating a Business That Can Thrive Without You, and The Automatic Customer, Creating a Subscription Business in Any Industry. Connect with John at facebook.com/built-to-sell or on Twitter at John Warrillow, WARRILLOW. Thanks for listening.